Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont. I like Dark Souls, and FromSoft's other similar titles. They have fascinating worlds full of memorable characters and enemies. Of those enemies, I've made videos speculating on who is the strongest king, who is the strongest lady, which is the strongest dragon. But you know what else makes up these games? Beasts. So that's the topic for this video. Who or which is the strongest beast in the Dark Souls trilogy, Bloodborne, Shadows Die Twice, and Elden Ring? What are we counting as beasts though? Clearly non-human characters who never have a human form. For example, we included Nashandra amongst humanoid females, because she has a clearly human form, even if it isn't her true form. But how about, say, Aldia? Do we count him as a beast, considering he's now a tree? What about beasts in Bloodborne who were once human, such as Ludwig or Lawrence? Well, if the process is irreversible, I think that's fair. My task for you is not only to leave your thoughts regarding these beasts, but tell me which you think is the strongest Demon Souls has to offer. I couldn't make up my mind there, so I decided not to include it in this video. I was leaning a little toward the Storm King, whose soul can be turned into what is referred to as one of the greatest miracles. And obviously there is the Old One himself, if we count that as a beast instead of a god. But with that said, let's touch on each game and see if we can't figure out the strongest beast of each. We've quite the array of beasts to choose from in Dark Souls. Demons, creatures, and other twisted beings. Of all the demons, do we include the Bed of Chaos? When I made the strongest females one, for example, a lot of people brought up, fairly, that the Witch of Izalith is probably one of the strongest females. I touched on it a bit in the comments on that video, but the reason I didn't focus on her in that video is that, again, we don't know too much about her in her Witch of Izalith form. For example, was she able to cast these firestorms without her daughters present? She probably was, but we don't know that, and I just decided not to include her for that reason. But I think it's a very fair and valid answer that people brought up as to who's the strongest from Dark Souls. As for the Bed of Chaos, I'm not sure if we can really include that here, as its very nature is something twisted to the point it can barely even be considered life. Ironic in a sense, given that it's now this seedbed of chaotic demon life. If you want to make an argument for the Bed of Chaos, by all means. But I think the strongest demon otherwise would be the Demon Fire Sage, the first demon and the last practitioner of fire magic. That is to say, the Demon Fire Sage isn't using pyromancy, but the far older flame arts. The Ceaseless Discharge is certainly larger, but his miserable existence doesn't lend itself to great strength, I believe. Do we count Nito as a beast? Even without Nito, we have Sif, the Sanctuary Guardian, or Guardians, the Moonlight Butterfly, and they are all more traditional beasts. And finally we have, I believe, the best bet here, Manus, Father of the Abyss. As with Nito, it's questionable as to whether or not they constitute true beasts. In form, however, certainly. But I think another qualifying factor for a beast is that in a sense it should lack an intelligence, and Nito may or may not be able to communicate with humans, but we don't really know there. Manus, however, I think is clearly lost completely, his mind, his sanity. It seems fairly clear-cut to me that Manus is stronger than, say, Sif, because we needed to rescue Sif from the Abyss, even if that was a young Sif, which is about as near as we ever get in Dark Souls as direct confirmation as to one force being greater than another. Not that Manus himself, picked up Sif and suplexed him, but you get the idea. I think Manus is the winner here. Of all these beasts, he is likely holding a considerable fragment of the Dark Soul. As with most beasts in Bloodborne, Manus was once human, but that form is lost to him forever, so I believe he both constitutes a beast and probably the strongest one in Dark Souls. What do you think? In Dark Souls 2 we have rats, cats, scorpions, spiders, and yes, 2 smelter demons. I think we can discount rats. Cats, Xiaohua? If all 7 of the Ivory King's beasts fought together, I think that might well be the winner. And although I like Arthur and his siblings, if you can call them that, I think the strongest of the beasts in Dark Souls 2 may be a little controversial, but I think it's the Old Iron King, or to put it another way, Icarus Earth, the demon that the Old Iron King was transformed into. Aside from size and power, it possesses a fragment of Gwyn's Lord Soul, the ultimate soul, the largest single source of power in the Souls trilogy that we know of. Dark Lurker is an interesting one to mention too. Unfortunately, there's virtually no lore, as it's almost a glorified Easter egg or cameo. Whether you think Dark Lurker is some lingering remnant of Manus in the same way Nishandra and her sisters are, or a reference to one of FromSoft's older games, or something older than even the Age of Ancients, we really don't know. Plus, Dark Lurker is close enough to being humanoid that maybe it doesn't count as a beast. Maybe it is sentient and intelligent and just chooses not to communicate with us. Likewise, Aldia might well be stronger than anything else we encounter, given that he is one of very few Souls enemies we encounter as a boss, but do not slay. His form is certainly beast-like, given he's a big tree, but whether or not he is some kind of bed of chaos-like entity or not, he retained his intelligence. I believe that may be a crucial part of what separates beast from man. Conversely, creatures such as Arthur and Sif are intelligent animals, but still distinct from humans. So I think Old Iron King. How about you? Dark Souls 3 has trees as well, or at least the curse-rotted Greatwood. Aceiros is another example of beast, or not. His form is beast-like, but his intelligence appears to be somewhat intact. Even if his sanity is slipping, he hasn't fallen into the realm of utter beastdom, such as, say, Amelia from Bloodborne. Either way, he's not the strongest, so moot point. Best candidate here, Aldrich, High Lord Wolnir, and the Demon Prince. Even if, again, we can make points for Wolnir and Aldrich. I think the God Eater is undeniably a beast, perhaps was never something that could be considered human, even if he had the form of one. But another good option here is the Demon Prince. Aldrich, on the one hand, has consumed Gwyndolin and dreamed of Priscilla, which has given him a simulacrum of life hunt. Although whether it functions as a true life hunt is unknown. The Demon Prince, meanwhile, is, in effect, the hope of demonkind, once defeated by Prince Lorien. And Lorien and Lothric are lords, as Aldrich is, so I can't decide between the two. Why not pit them against each other? Aldrich is weak to fire and uses fire and magic. The Demon Prince is resistant to fire and uses fire, so he has a type advantage. If we're looking at his in-game stats, yes, he has higher health and soul value. That doesn't really mean much from a lore perspective though, because he's an endgame DLC boss. Aldrich is a mid-game boss. But all things considered, I am leaning toward the Prince. Although it's very close to me, and the main reason I'm giving it to the Prince is that I feel if we put those two against each other, I think the Prince would win. I don't think Aldrich would be able to consume the Prince, as the Prince could burn Aldrich away with his stanky sludge. Plus, the Demon Prince is undeniably a beast, compared to Aldrich, who you could make an argument that he's just a twisted human. Bloodborne is home of the beasts, and we've a number. Orphan, Lawrence, Ludwig, Moon Presence. Those are my initial thoughts for strongest. Ludwig is an interesting one though. I don't think we can classify his second phase as a beast. Ludwig the Accursed, yes. Ludwig the Holy Blade, no. As he amazingly, damn near impossibly, restored his humanity, if not his human form. Which shows how formidable his willpower was. But Moon Presence and the Orphan of Kos are the two big ones, right? All great ones lose their children. The Orphan lost its mother. In my eyes, that makes the Orphan somewhat special, and beyond that, whilst the Moon Presence demonstrates more fantastic abilities, I believe it's still a fairly traditional great one. Most of its machinations are behind the scenes. The only time it resorts to brute force and to a fight is when it's left no other option, really. None of the Great Ones, I would argue, are creatures of immense power in the sense of combat power. They do not conquer other worlds or peoples. They are not inherently warlike from most of what Bloodborne tells us. The Great Ones lose their children. Humans in Yharnam sought out secrets beyond the stars, and they called to these eldritch beings who answered the call and have come to Yharnam. But they aren't here as great warriors and champions and fighters. They watch, largely from behind the scenes, and they only really fight, again, when they have no other option. Very little in Bloodborne paints them as being powerful in the sense of combat ability. If you disagree, please do quote me in-game references to Bloodborne. The Orphan of Kos, however, is perhaps due to its eerily human-like form. It is brutal, violent, and physically powerful. If we compare it to the Moon Presence on a gameplay level, it's worth less souls, but it has more health. It also has a greater resistance than the Moon Presence all round, so I think the Orphan of Kos is just stronger personally. And yes, I do believe that most of the beasts and human-like things in Bloodborne are stronger than the Great Ones. Not in the sense of, oh, they have magical powers, but in the sense that they are violent, brutal, animal-like beasts. Demon of Hatred. Moving on. Okay. We have the Guardian Ape and the Giant Snake as well, I suppose. The snake is large, but it's still just a giant snake. The Guardian Ape is immortal, which gives it an advantage of sorts, but the Demon of Hatred is a failed Shura. Evidently, a failed Shura is still somewhat terrifying. The Interior Ministry's assault on Ashina woke up quite a nightmare in the form of the sculptor's consumed demonic form. Well, we have quite the bevy of beasts once again. The God-devouring serpent, the ancestor spirits, the falling star beasts, Astel, Radagon's wolf, the gargoyles, trolls, deathrite birds, Malekith the Black Blade, and of course, the Elden Beast. As with my who is the strongest lady in Souls, I think the case is kind of similar here in that if we took all the beasts from Elden Ring and put them up against all the other beasts, as in from Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, Shadows Die Twice, I think Elden Ring comes out on top. The Elden Beast is presumably the strongest beast, given that the Elden Beast is suggested by the game to be the Elden Ring, which is quite a big deal. The only dilemma here is, do we count it as a beast? And you're probably thinking, Alex, it's literally called the Elden Beast. And I'm not just trying to be contrarian or difficult, but the game tells us God slain after defeating it. It also is in the form of the Elden Ring for most of the game, inside of Marika and Radagon. So, to some extent you can make the argument that it's not a beast, but it is literally called a beast. But I think for the sake of this video, we'll maybe not include it, as otherwise this video would just end here because we just say the Elden Beast is the best. So let's classify it as a god, as that's what the game calls it. I know. Surely we can classify the Great Ones from Bloodborne as gods too. But, well, we're going with the Orphan of Kos anyway, so maybe we need a specific strongest gods video. But for now, we'll go with Malekith. Which leads us to the battle. First up, the Elden Beast. Yes, I think it would probably have won this. It's immune to all status ailments, it has strong holy defense, decent resistances to all other elements, but it's weaker to physical attacks of all sorts. The Demon of Hatred and Orphan of Kos would probably have the best time against the Elden Beast, perhaps Manus too, as they can rely on brute force. Whereas the Demon Prince, for example, and Icarus Earth rely more on fire. Not entirely, but to some extent. But ignoring him, let's look at the other matchups. Do any of them have any standout advantages over any of the others? Well, Old Iron King and Demon Prince are both highly resistant to fire. We can assume the Demon of Hatred would be as well to some extent. The Orphan of Kos isn't weak to fire, but it's one of his more vulnerable points. Several of them are relatively weak to lightning, not that it matters, as I don't think anyone here can utilize it. The Orphan of Kos has an attack where it summons lightning, but I think it's actually not the Orphan doing it. The Orphan screams, and then lightning seems to come from, I believe, the corpse of Kos, if that is Kos's corpse. Likewise, I don't think any of them really use status ailments, with the exception of things like Destined Death. Notably, none of them are specifically immortal, so their hardiness comes down largely to, well, durability. I think it's fair to say that Demon Prince is the squishiest, based solely on his stats, but is that also due to him being the last phase of a long fight? Maybe. The Orphan of Kos has the highest in-game health, but again, those aren't always a great indication, as Manus is from Dark Souls 1, where enemies have like a quarter of the health they do in Elden Ring. It's worth noting, Malekith is the only one with armor, if that means anything. He could have, divine armor. The Old Iron King is the biggest, but also the slowest. If we're talking speed, Orphan of Kos is probably the fastest. Hard to call it, but in terms of speed, from Lethargic to Angry Bee, we have Old Iron King, Manus, Demon Prince, Demon of Hatred, Malekith, and Orphan. It's very hard to call it between Orphan and Malekith. Orphan's small size might give him an advantage over some of the others, as he's a smaller hitbox, he's a smaller target, but he also has a lot of wide-reaching attacks, including one which, again, technically might be a lightning ability. I don't know if we can even count that as one of his or its attacks. What do you think? Should we count that as one of his abilities? Even without it, I think he's doing pretty well. Malekith, of course, has Destined Death, a very powerful status ailment, which should work on all of the others. At least I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't. He's able to launch projectiles, even if he has less AoE than Orphan. I think the fact that neither of them sacrificed power for speed gives them a huge advantage. But here's something else to consider. The old stanky earth from Dark Souls 2. Does he bring that lava pool with him? Does it emanate from him, such as the Abyss emanates from Manus? Because we can assume any fight against Manus is going to take place in the Abyss. Even if you pluck him out and throw him somewhere else, the Abyss emanates from him, or so Goth has us believe. So eventually, he would be making anything around him an Abyss, the Abyss. It doesn't inherently give him a strong advantage here, as none of the others would be inherently weak to it. Maybe the Old Iron King would be, because he possesses some of Gwyn's soul. Maybe Malekith would, because Malekith is a holy entity within Elden Ring, and you might say that Abyss would be strong against holy entities, but again, that's only because we know it's strong against like things in Dark Souls, which are holy in the context of Dark Souls. Would the Old Iron King turn his battlefield into a mass of molten lava? If so, Demon Prince, Demon of Hatred would not really be too put out by that, but the Orphan and Malekith would be taking somewhat severe fire damage constantly. Unfortunately, for the Iron King, I don't think the lava flows from him. If you recall, the Old Iron King created the Smelter Demon, which woke up and slayed him with one stroke. The king's body fell into the lava and then became subsumed, consumed, absorbed by the beast. It became what we see and fight against. Ergo, the lava came first, and there's not a lot of compelling evidence to suggest he, spews it out, other than in the limited fashion in which he attacks. Frankly, I believe that the Orphan and Malekith are able to take on any of the others due to their speed and power. Manus and the Old Iron King aren't just on the slower side, but they are chunky targets compared to Malekith and Orphan, who are skinny. As for those two, I think Orphan actually might have the edge in raw power due to the sheer rage with which it attacks. However, Malekith is a seasoned fighter. We also have to take into account that it's possible when we fight Malekith, he is at a reduced capacity, considering that he's been nibbling Deathroot where he can find it. Now, you might argue the fight is the same whether you've given him all the Deathroot or none of the Deathroot, unless I'm mistaken. I don't think there's any differences other than in dialogue, but he might have also been consuming Deathroot for years before the Tarnished, popped up. We don't know if it's made him weaker, but it's just something to consider. Still, Malekith fought at least one powerful individual. At least the game implies that with the Gloam-Eyed Queen. We assume he fought her, given how that all panned out. Marika was involved in a great many battles, even if not directly, so it stands to reason that Malekith may have more real combat experience than the Orphan, who exists in a nightmare, and in a sense, is a nightmare. So whilst it's very close, I believe Malekith is the winner. Frankly, the top three are all very close in my eyes. Malekith, Orphan, and the Demon of Hatred. All of them are spectacular creatures. Purely on a subjective, personal scale, my greatest sense of achievement was defeating the Demon of Hatred. I didn't really struggle with Malekith. Orphan took me a couple attempts, but Demon of Hatred I remember taking me more than a few. But I was also playing that game with a swollen hand, which was unfortunate. But what do you think? Do you agree with this? Do you disagree? Maybe you disagree with my picks from each title. Please do let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care. If you enjoyed this video, I have plenty of others like it on the channel for you to check out. And more to come. Next time, strongest god? Strongest boss from Shadow of the Erdtree? Strongest duo?